What happens when the nation's top law enforcer is asked a simple question, will you follow the law, and suddenly the answer isn't so simple? That moment just played out in a Senate hearing, and what followed revealed something far deeper than a debate over numbers on a spreadsheet. It exposed fault lines inside the Justice Department, raised questions about transparency, and put the Attorney General in the hot seat over issues that touch every corner of public trust. It started with a question that should have been the easiest in the world to answer. Senator Chris Van Hollen looked across the table and asked point blank, will you comply with the budget authorization law?
Senator Capito, thank you. We do not intend to have a second round of questions, but in our usual fashion, I'm going to call on Senator Van Hollen for his concluding questions and wrap up, and then I'll do the same.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Attorney General Bondi, I have some budget-related questions to follow up on here. First, with respect to the proposal with the ATF. I've heard your testimony here. I heard it in the House, so I really don't want to get into a I'm not questioning you about the policy at this point in time. I think you hear there's bipartisan disagreement here. But I do want to understand your view with respect to the appropriations law, because current appropriations law does require congressional authorization to make this change, to make this merger. And so my question to you as the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the United States is, will you comply with the budget authorization law?
We will comply with the budget law. And you know, Senator, I'm glad you brought this merger up, because if I was still a state prosecutor and hearing this, I would be concerned too about what's happening to ATF. ATF will keep its brand. DEA will keep its brand. But what they're doing, they're going under one umbrella, doing away with the bureaucracy at the top. These agents are going, they want to be out hunting down criminals. That's what they want to do. They work, so much of this work is the same work, going back and forth. And now they will be working collaboratively together to keep America safe. And we're going to put hundreds of agents back, thousands, back on the streets, and that's where they want to be. And I would have had the initial concerns that you have about that. But give us a chance, let it work, let the DEA and ATF work together, get those agents out there, do away with the bureaucracy, and hopefully we will make America safer as a result of it.
Well, I will say that wasn't just my reaction to the proposal. I was actually hearing from ATF agents as well. So again, we will obviously review that question in a bipartisan way on the committee, but I just wanted your assurance, and I appreciate it, that you'll comply with the appropriations law, which would require congressional action in order to go forward with that.
We don't need congressional action for this move, however.
Oh, well, I thought I just got clarification. Well, it's going to be important to both the chairman and myself to understand your position as Attorney General on whether or not you can proceed with this merger without congressional action.
We are keeping ATF, we are keeping DEA. We are putting them under the same umbrella within the Department of Justice.
So I'm not arguing with you here. I want to understand your position. I think it will be important to members on both sides of the committee. The appropriations law currently would require that Congress approve of this merger. And so my question to you as Attorney General is, do you agree with that or disagree with that?
We will complete this reorganization, and I'm committed. I will look at that under the law. We will not violate the law, Senator, and we will work with Congress regarding that.
No, I appreciate that. So the second point I wanted to raise had to do with the prosecution of hate crimes, and I share your vigor in wanting to go after and prosecute hate crimes. I would just point out that the budget that you submitted zeroes out funding for 3 of the DOJ hate crimes programs, the hate crimes training program, Shepard Bird hate crimes, the Javara Hire No Hate Act, and the community approaches to advancing Justice. So I hope you'll work with the committee if we seek to restore funding for those programs.
Yes, Senator, I just pulled up the details of those three. Let me see. I'd be happy to discuss those with you further.
Good. And finally, I want to go back.
All three of those.
Thank you. I want to go back to the issues of grant determinations, because I think there continues to be some confusion between grants that had already been obligated that were withheld. And to my knowledge, there are about 400 of those still pending. It'd be helpful to get from your team if you have a different number. And then there's what we call notices for information, which relates to notices for future grant awards in this current fiscal year.
Yes, there is a difference.
And so I understood your earlier testimony to say, with respect to the notices, you do plan, the department plan to issue those very shortly. Is that right?
Yeah, and Senator, yes, you are correct on that. We notified the affected grantees and members of Congress regarding the terminations and how to appeal. That was the $811 million of grants that were initially terminated in 2025. We're also talking about upcoming ones as well.
Right. So I want to leave this hearing with some clarity on this issue. So when it comes to the notices of funding opportunities, because the clock is ticking on this fiscal year, do you and the Department of Justice intend to quickly notify people of those opportunities going forward?
Yes, Senator Van Hollen, as I said earlier, and it will be done on a rolling basis, but yes, within the coming weeks, we are absolutely doing that, yes.
And so finally, on
a rolling basis.
On the other category, which are the grants that had been previously obligated, I do have concerns, Madam Attorney General, with the idea that the way we're going to get them to stop being withheld is members of Congress calling. I appreciate the invitation, and I will look to see if we've been hearing from people. But this category of grants relates to people who already went through the process and already had those grants obligated, and they're currently being held. So my question to you is, can you tell us how many are still being held today? And I don't like the idea that in order for somebody to get their withheld grant unheld, that they have to call a member of Congress. That should be, so how many are left? Do you know? How many of these grants are?
I don't know exactly, Senator, but I know many of them are the subject of ongoing litigation, so I wouldn't be able to speak of that in detail in this forum anyway.
Well, maybe just a follow-up, because it would be helpful to try to narrow the scope of this. Again, my understanding, and this was the subject of the letter I referenced earlier from a number of senators.
And I have not read that letter, but I will be happy to read that letter.
If you and your team could get back to us right away on that, because these are grants that, as the chairman knows, have been previously obligated, some many years ago, but frozen. And so the question is, how can we get them unfrozen? And members of Congress will call, but not everybody, can just call up their member of Congress or thinks of calling their member of Congress. We need a process that's fair to everybody. I hope you'd agree.
And actually, citizens have called as well.
Well, exactly. And so, exactly. So, but again, this is an ongoing issue. And I know colleagues on both sides of the aisle are hearing from it, folks. So, Mr. Chairman, unless something else comes up, that's it. And look forward to continuing the conversation.
It's not my intention to ask any topics or questions that cause you to come back again, but if I do.
Thank you, Senator Moran.
You're welcome, General.
No tricks, no political traps, just the most basic responsibility of the executive branch to respect Congress's constitutional power of the purse. What happened next left even seasoned observers shaking their heads. Instead of a clear, unwavering yes, what we got was a dodge. A shifting, careful response that seemed to say yes and no at the same time, and this is where the tension begins. Because when the person entrusted with upholding the law hesitates to affirm they'll actually follow it, the question isn't just about budgets, it's about accountability. From that moment the spotlight widened to one of the Justice Department's most controversial moves, the plan to merge the ATF and DEA under one umbrella. On the surface it sounds like efficiency, fewer layers of bureaucracy, more agents on the streets, two agencies finally working in sync instead of tripping over each other. Bondi framed it like that too, freeing agents to chase criminals instead of chasing paperwork. She painted it as a win for public safety. But here's the problem: according to appropriations law, major reorganizations like this require congressional approval. You can't just redraw the map of federal law enforcement with the stroke of a pen. At least that's what the law says. Yet when pressed, Bondi insisted they didn't need Congress to sign off. Then moments later she pulled back and promised they'd review it under the law and wouldn't violate it. A neat trick of language, but it raises the real fear: is this reform, or is this executive overreach dressed up as efficiency? Think about it. If a department can decide on its own to consolidate entire agencies without Congress, what's next? Could other departments quietly reshape themselves, consolidate power, and bypass the checks that are supposed to keep government accountable? Critics warn this isn't just a bureaucratic shift, it's a precedent. And precedents have a way of sticking around long after the headlines fade. But that wasn't the only red flag in this hearing. Van Hollen shifted to another front: hate crimes. The Department of Justice had submitted a budget that astonishingly zeroed out funding for 3 critical programs that train, track, and prosecute hate crimes. These include the Shepherd Bird Hate Crimes Program, the Jabara Hayer No Hate Act, and community-based initiatives to build resilience and fight bias on the ground. Cutting them isn't just a line on a budget, it's a signal. At a moment when hate crimes are spiking across the country, stripping funding from the very programs designed to confront them sends the exact opposite message of commitment. Van Hollen pressed on this, pointing out the contradiction between Bondi's stated vigor for fighting hate crimes and her department's budget proposal to wipe out funding. Her answer: a vague promise to review the details. Not exactly reassuring when entire communities are watching to see if the government still has their back. And then came the third major clash, one that hits even closer to home for thousands of communities: frozen federal grants. These aren't hypothetical dollars or future promises. These are grants that were already awarded, already obligated, in some cases years ago, and yet they're still sitting in limbo, withheld without clear explanation. Schools, nonprofits, police departments, and local governments, all waiting for money they've already been told they'd get. Van Hollen's frustration was obvious. He spelled it out: it shouldn't take a senator's phone call to unfreeze money that has already been approved. That's not how accountability works. That's not how fairness works. And if that's the only way the system moves, then something is broken. Bondi's response: she admitted she didn't know the exact number of frozen grants. Some, she claimed, were tied up in ongoing litigation. But the larger issue remained unanswered: why is there no clear, transparent process for these communities to finally receive what they've been promised? Why are leaders telling people to call Congress instead of building a system that works for everyone, not just those with political access? Layer by layer, what this hearing revealed was a troubling pattern. A merger pushed forward without clear congressional approval. Hate crimes programs stripped of funding with little explanation. Grants frozen in limbo, leaving ordinary people to beg their representatives for help. And through it all, the top official at the DOJ giving answers that shifted, dodged, or punted responsibility. This isn't just about numbers in a budget. It's about the relationship between the people and their government. When communities can't trust that grants will arrive, when Congress's constitutional authority is sidestepped, when programs protecting vulnerable groups vanish without explanation, the question grows louder: who is the Justice Department serving? The law, or its own agenda? Now let's zoom out for a moment. Bondi and her defenders argue that all of this is about modernization, about cutting red tape, freeing agents, and letting law enforcement do what it does best. They frame it as common sense reform, but reform without transparency is just control. And every time an answer to a direct question turns into a careful dodge, confidence erodes. Van Hollen's line of questioning cut to the heart of that. His point wasn't partisan. It wasn't about playing politics. It was about a simple principle: the executive branch does not get to rewrite the rules on its own. Congress controls the purse strings. The law is the law, and if the top law enforcer hesitates on that point, what does it say about everything else? The most telling moment came when Van Hollen pressed again. Do you agree that Congress must approve this merger? Bondi's reply: we will complete this reorganization, and we won't violate the law. Notice the gap. That's not the same as saying yes. That's leaving space to maneuver, space to move forward and dare Congress to catch up. It's a dangerous game, and the stakes are higher than they appear, because if this kind of maneuvering becomes the norm, oversight weakens, power consolidates, and the people left waiting for accountability, whether they're victims of hate crimes, communities depending on frozen grants, or even ATF agents worried about their future, are the ones who pay the price. This hearing in many ways was a reminder that accountability doesn't happen on its own. It has to be demanded. And the questions that sound simple: will you follow the law? Will you protect these programs? Will you deliver promised funds? Are often the ones that reveal the deepest truths. Because at the end of the day, what Americans want isn't complicated. They want laws respected, promises kept, and resources delivered fairly. They want hate crimes taken seriously, not quietly stripped from the budget. They want agencies working efficiently, but not in ways that sidestep oversight. They want grants unfrozen without having to pull political strings. They want trust. And when leaders struggle to give clear answers to those basic expectations, the message people hear is that trust is optional, that accountability is negotiable, that the system bends depending on who's in charge. But hearings like this cut through that. They put the contradictions on record. They give the public a window into how power works and how it sometimes tries to avoid responsibility. So if you're watching this and thinking what's really at stake here, the answer is bigger than one senator, one attorney general, or one department. It's about whether the institutions we rely on will stand up to scrutiny or hide behind technicalities. It's about whether power respects oversight. And it's about whether the most basic promise of government to serve the people transparently and fairly will hold. That's why this matters. That's why these questions can't be brushed off. And that's why staying engaged, paying attention, and demanding accountability matters more than ever. If you found this breakdown helpful, and you want to see more deep dives that cut through the spin and explain what's really going on behind these hearings, make sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join the conversation in the comments. Because the more we understand what's at stake, the harder it becomes for leaders to dodge the truth, and together that's how we hold them accountable.